The dark web is a grim place, a pit where humanity's worst instincts thrive, and it's where I work. I'm what's known as a white hat, a kind of good guy hacker paid to tear down vile markets, map the trails that lead to the monsters hiding in the shadows, and shine a sort of light into that darkness. Most days I sit in front of my screens, the glow of my monitors the only light in my small, cluttered apartment as my fingers fly over the keyboard, piercing layers of encrypted filth and exposing secrets no one else dares to look for. It's my job, and it's not for the faint of heart, but I'm goddamn good at it. I've seen horrors beyond imagination, things no one should ever witness, but the case that haunts me started on a day like any other. A routine sweep led to a marketplace buried deep in the web's underbelly. It advertised human lives as commodities, young and old, with glossy images and cold descriptions. I'd seen it before, but this one had a different aura. Polished, professional, and insidiously quiet. A digital fortress, almost daring anyone to try to break in. I remember digging into its code and unraveling the layers of security, sort of like peeling an onion. It was very slow and grueling and frustrating work, and the site had a grotesque elegance to it, its defenses crafted by someone who knew what they were doing. But no system is impenetrable, and by the end of the third day I was in. The database was rather vast, with entries detailing victims, names, ages, photos, and chillingly precise descriptions of their usefulness. Each profile was a silent scream, a plea buried in ones and zeros, and I started extracting the data, piecing together patterns and names and connections, and as always, I logged everything meticulously, building a dossier that might help the authorities when I was done dismantling the site. Then I found her, a girl from the Philippines, and she couldn't have been more than 12. Her photo showed a child with wide, frightened eyes and a forced smile. Her profile was detailed in a way that made my stomach churn. And something about her entry stood out, though. An odd note in the metadata, a small breadcrumb someone had left behind. It was a payment log, and it didn't lead to a buyer. It led back to her family. I ran her name through every database I had access to, cross-referencing missing persons reports, social media posts, and news articles. And the trail was faint, but it was there. She disappeared months ago, her last known sighting in a small village. The local news barely mentioned it, and her parents never reported her missing. Instead, their lives had taken a very curious turn. I found pictures of them on Facebook, standing in front of a newly built house. Posts bragging about a blessing that had come their way. Expensive clothes, lavish parties, smiles plastered across their faces. It just didn't add up. Where does a poor family suddenly get that kind of money? The pieces clicked together, a grotesque puzzle I wish that I hadn't solved. They sold her. Their own flesh and blood, handed over to monsters for a better life. I stared at the screen, bile rising up in my throat ready to vomit, and it wasn't just the marketplace. It was the betrayal, the abandonment, the cold calculations that turned a child into currency. I've always kept my work professional, very detached, but this time I couldn't stop thinking about her. She wasn't just a name in a database anymore. She was a girl who had been discarded like trash, her life ripped apart by the people who were supposed to love her most. I dug deeper into her family. Bank records, private messages, anything I could find. Every transaction told a story, and the trail was very damning. The deposit that coincided with her disappearance, the gradual splurge on luxuries, they weren't just complicit, they were thriving off her suffering. The more I uncovered, the more I felt anger creeping in. My work had always been about dismantling systems, not judging individuals, but this felt very personal. Her image haunted me, that forced smile and the terror in her eyes. I just couldn't shake it no matter how hard I tried. I've been compiling evidence for weeks, building a case that would hold up under scrutiny, and the authorities would take it from there, and that's how it always worked. But with each passing day, the thought of her family living in comfort while she suffered gnawed at me. They'd bought their happiness with her life. It was just monstrous. One night, as I sifted through the last of the data, I made a decision. I wouldn't just hand over the evidence and walk away. I would make them feel the weight of what they'd done. They couldn't be allowed to forget her, to erase her like she was nothing. I crafted an email, anonymous and untraceable, attaching photos of their daughter from the marketplace, blurred enough to protect her dignity but unmistakable. I sent it to them with no words, just images. I wanted them to see her, to remember what they'd done. I'll never know if they opened it, but I imagined the guilt festering inside them like a rot. It wasn't justice, but it was something. The marketplace was gone within days, wiped clean from the dark web. My work there was done, and the authorities had the evidence they needed to start tracking that network, but her face has stayed with me, a ghost that I couldn't exorcise. I like to think that she's still alive somewhere, that the system I helped dismantle gave her a chance at freedom. But I know better. The dark web doesn't just let go of its victims easily. Still, I keep working, tearing down one monster at a time, because if I don't, who will?
Breakups are tough, even when you know they're for the best. I'd been trying to keep myself together after splitting up with my boyfriend of 2.5 years. I don't really want to get into it. It wasn't messy or dramatic. We just weren't right for each other anymore, but that didn't make it any easier. Some days, it felt like everything reminded me of him. I'd been forcing myself to stick to no contact, telling myself that it was the healthiest way for both of us to move on. It was hard though, really hard. One of the things I missed most about us was playing pool together. It was our thing. I'm a pretty decent player, definitely better than average, but my ex, he was incredible on his good days. He could pull off trick shots like it was nothing. 1-rail, 2-rail banks, kicks, combinations. I'm pretty sure he was even learning a standard mass. We each had pool tables at home, but obviously we're young, and staying inside every night wasn't exactly ideal. When we did go out, we always made sure that wherever we were going, usually a bar, had some pool tables. We hated crowded bars with long waits for tables and screaming patrons though, so the places we went were quieter, usually attracting an older crowd. Dive bars with old, scuffed tables and sticky floors were our sweet spot. Obviously, you can't expect to find a regulation table in pristine condition at any bar, but the dive bars were definitely a better shout than rowdy college bars. We were usually the youngest people there, but we didn't care. At that point in our relationship, we had grown somewhat bored of the typical college, let's get plastered every night mentality. Plus, even though I'm kind of shy, my ex was pretty charismatic and would get along with anyone. Us not being total newbies at pool didn't hurt either. A few weeks ago, I found myself missing that part of my life more than usual. It was a random Wednesday though, so none of my friends were free. I didn't want to sit around the house feeling sorry for myself anymore, so I decided to head out to one of the bars we used to go to. I told myself it wasn't about nostalgia, that I just needed to get out. Believe me, I'm not the type of person, nor do I usually have the confidence to go out myself, but I was feeling some type of way that night. The bar was exactly the same as I remembered. Dim lighting, worn out stools, a jukebox in the corner. The familiarity was comforting, but it also stung. The memories came flooding back, and I almost turned around and left right then, but I forced myself to stay. After grabbing a few drinks, I wandered over to one of the pool tables and started idly chalking a cue. I'm not really sure what I was planning on doing there. Playing alone would have been a little odd. Luckily, my question was answered because a guy walked over. He was maybe in his mid-20s, the only person in the room even close to my age. He leaned against the table and asked if I was up for a game. I nodded and told him to rack him up. He put some money in the slot and started racking the balls. I laughed to myself as he racked them wrong, but I didn't say anything. We played a few rounds, and I started to relax. He wasn't bad, not as good as my ex, but not terrible. I wasn't going easy on him though. I won every rack we played. We chatted as we played, and he even bought me a couple of drinks. He was friendly enough, but it quickly became clear he wasn't the brightest guy in the world. I like sharp and quick-witted guys who can hold their own in a conversation. This guy, not so much. Still, I didn't mind. It felt good to just play and talk and not overthink things for once. I was having a good time. After the 4th game, he popped the question, asking if I wanted to go back to his place. The question caught me off guard, but I guess I couldn't have been too shocked. I froze for a second before shaking my head. I tried to make it playful, saying he'd need a second date for that. In all honesty, I just didn't want to move so quickly. I guess I wouldn't have been totally opposed to taking things further with him, but a random Wednesday night wasn't the time for that. I guess I didn't do a good job turning him down though, because his entire demeanor changed. His smile dropped, and he literally started scowling at me. I was not prepared for what happened next. He said, "Are you serious?" and grabbed my wrist, saying something about spending all that money on those drinks. Before I could respond, he snatched my purse too. I had never been in a situation like that, so instead of screaming or fighting, I just kind of froze up. Even though we were in a public place, I was still terrified. Luckily, a couple of older guys at the bar noticed what was happening and stepped in. I'm honestly not sure what I would have done had they not. One of them told the guy to let me go. The guy glared at me, muttered something under his breath, and threw my purse back onto the table before storming right out of the bar. My heart was still racing, and I thanked those guys profusely for helping me out. That was it for me though. I called an Uber and left the bar, still kind of shocked and trying to process what had just happened. I decided to close my eyes in the Uber. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember is the Uber driver gently waking me up. We were parked across the street from my house. I thanked him, got out of the car, and started walking toward the door. As I rummaged through my bag for my keys, I impulsively checked my phone for the first time since leaving the bar. That's when I saw it. That god-awful notification, AirTag found moving with you. I nearly dropped my phone. My hands started to shake as I rummaged through my purse, tossing aside my wallet and makeup until my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. I pulled it out and stared in disbelief. There was literally an AirTag in my bag. A wave of panic hit me, way worse than what I was feeling earlier. I was still standing in the middle of the street, so I threw it on the ground and stomped on it a bunch of times until I was sure it was broken. I fought back a scream and started breathing heavily. The cold wasn't helping. I needed to get inside. I looked around frantically, but the street was completely empty. Whoever had planted the AirTag, probably that guy from the bar, would know exactly where I was. Maybe not my exact house, but the street for sure. The houses on my street are large and spaced out, so he'd definitely be able to narrow it down. I grabbed my purse and sprinted to the back door, fumbling with the lock before finally getting inside. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I was safe, but I couldn't stop shaking. I walked up to my room, wondering how I had gotten myself into this mess. Normally I'm asleep by 10 and out cold for 9 or 10 hours, but there was no way I was going to sleep that night. I looked out my bedroom window, thinking maybe the scenery would lull me to sleep or something. As I was looking out the window, kind of mindlessly, I noticed an old, beat-up Lincoln drive slowly past my house. Nothing too unusual, but it was kind of late for cars to be driving on a residential road. But then it came back from the opposite direction, and I knew something was wrong. It passed even slower the second time, like the driver was scanning the houses. I didn't want to face the reality of the situation, but when it passed a third time, I had no choice. It was the guy. It had to be. He was trying to find my house. I wanted to scream again. The next time the car passed, the driver's side window was rolled halfway down. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want that guy to know he was in the right area. I know that doesn't make any sense, but I was so scared and couldn't think straight. The next time the car passed, the driver's hand was hanging out of the window, holding something. It looked like a knife. And then, instead of driving past, the car stopped in the middle of the road, right across from my house. I ducked down, my heart beating a million beats a minute again. I stayed there, crouched below the window, too terrified to move. By the time I looked up, the car was gone. I waited for what must have been an hour, but it didn't come back. The next morning, I told my parents everything. My dad scolded me for not calling the police, but I told him I was too scared to. He called a buddy of his, a police chief, to ask for advice. His friend said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence or the car's plate number, which I hadn't been able to see. His friend told us to call the police immediately should we ever see that car again. I didn't leave the house for days. Even now, I'm really scared that he's waiting somewhere and he's going to see me enter or exit my house again. I haven't seen the car since though, so maybe the nightmare is over.
In light of the increasing prevalence of UFO sightings, and because there's the distinct possibility that our personnel will be the first ones approached by the observer, I have obtained a copy of the Air Force's instructions on how to deal with UFO reports. It covers what information should be obtained from the observer and how the report should be channeled. It's not surprising to hear that there was an increase in sightings after Stephen's story gained international notoriety. Such is the way, but hearing it in such an official capacity adds a healthy dollop of realness to it all, don't you think? The instructions were brief enough to include in the report, which means I can read them to you right now. Now, this is the official two-step process according to Canadian Air Force bases and other forces at the time. The first section says, reports of UFOs are frequently received at Canadian Force bases from various sources. Canadian Forces Headquarters is responsible for processing any action required regarding the report. The report should be transmitted to Headquarters in accordance with Section 2. Section 2 says, unclassified priority messages should be addressed to CanForce HED, and the first words in the text should be for CFOC UFO report. All reports should include as much of the following information as possible. A. Date and time of sighting. B. Sky conditions. C. Observer's identity. D. Observer's location. E. Identification of any other witnesses. F. Description of the object. G. Duration of the sighting. And H. Any other relevant information. This form was published by the Royal Canadian Air Force on October 7th, 1966. And that, my friends, is how the Canadians handled UFO sightings in the 60s. The Central Forces Headquarters would assess these reports to determine whether or not further investigation was required, and if it was, they would pass the information along to the closest Air Force unit to make the necessary inquiries. Now, there are a few inconsistencies that I wanted to mention before we conclude the story of Stephen Michalek. You'll notice the police report stated the supposed landing site was never found, but most articles are actually saying otherwise. Some say a perfect circle of burned vegetation was found when Stephen returned to Falcon Lake with the police, while others say he found it with a friend while exploring on their own weeks after the fact. Some say the circle was 15 feet in diameter, while others say it was actually 30 feet wide. As far as I can tell, this is just how urban legends begin, but who knows? Maybe there was a crop circle, but the government decided to cover it up. That's not the only supposed evidence found that was never mentioned in the official report. Some articles also mentioned pieces of melted radioactive metal were found along with high levels of radioactive elements in the soil and Stephen's clothing. But this was ultimately concluded to be the result of radium veins that happened to be nearby. Or is that what they want us to think? Most articles did agree that initial theories concluded our man was merely hallucinating due to alcohol consumption, but most of the official investigations ended with inconclusive results. No one could definitively say or explain how Michalek's physical wounds and symptoms occurred. Skeptics tend to conclude Stephen's injuries did indeed result from some sort of drunken stupor, but I failed to find any explanations as to how, and I for the life of me can't seem to come up with my own theories of how he could have done this. As to why he might do such a thing, I don't really know. It would not only conceal the true cause of his injuries, assuming that's something he'd want to hide, he could possibly dissuade competing prospectors from staking their own claims on veins in the area. Of course, this would have the opposite effect as hordes of investigators, reporters, and members of the public flocked to the scene. There were a few attempts to explain Steven's health conditions with an allergic reaction, but I can't get behind that one honestly. The science seems a bit, iffy. I find it difficult to believe allergies are the answer. Even if the initial wounds were so easily explained, I've never heard of an allergic reaction resulting in years of serious health concerns Steven ultimately experienced. Have you? Now, I did try to check around for some other similar sightings that were supposedly occurring at the time, but I only really found 2 other ones. Back then, it was fairly common for locals to still visit the garbage dump just to watch bears rummage for food, apparently. One night, a server from the hotel went there with her boyfriend, and on the drive home, a silver object appeared in the sky. It followed them for some time, but her boyfriend was able to speed up, and they made it safely into town. The server was living in the hotel's staff accommodations, and this experience rattled her so badly that she refused to leave her room for the following day. Sometime later, the hotel's owner's son, Steve Busek, received a strange call from a friend's brother. Bob and Bill said they could hear an electronic sound coming from the woods near the home of Penguin Resort. Steve walked down by the road to check it out, and when he came to the final hill, he heard it clear as day, a steady beeping sound. It almost sounded like it had some sort of pulsating influence to it, like it was coming from the trees. The 3 young men ventured into the woods with their flashlights, but the source seemed to be coming from everywhere all at once. The next day, Steve spoke with a local trapper who was somewhat of an expert on the unusual. When Steve told him about the electronic beeping, he laughed and said it was probably only a saw-whet owl. All I can say is that it must be one strange owl sound if it was some sort of electronic pulsating sound. Or could this have been related to the Stephen McCallick experience? I don't know, and we'll probably never know for sure. So, ultimately, Swamp Folk, what do you guys think? Is there a theory you agree with, or do you have your own? Have any of you ever visited Falcon Lake yourself? I would love to hear about any personal experiences you may have, and be sure to let me know if you want to learn more about UFO sightings. It's interesting to note that Falcon Lake isn't terribly far from Washington's border, which does happen to be one of the highest number of UFO sightings in our country. Coincidence or something more? I don't know. We'll discuss that in another video. It was really fun to cover one of these. I haven't done one of these in a couple of years. I think the last one I did was a case where a bunch of Illinois police officers were allegedly chasing down a UFO. And then the one I did before that was the strange and infamous case of the Warminster thing. You can find both of those on my channel. I'm definitely looking to cover more stuff like this, so definitely put your suggestions down below.
The shovel struck something hard, sending a jolt up my arms. I paused, wiping sweat from my brow with a muddy hand. We'd been digging for hours, and the well was supposed to be nothing but dirt for at least another 10 feet. I called down to my son, Jake, who was working beside me in the hole. "Hey, grab the flashlight, will you? I think we hit something." Little did I know, that metallic clang would be the sound that changed everything. I'd inherited this farm from my uncle 6 months ago. It was a fixer-upper, to put it mildly, but it was a chance for a fresh start after the divorce. Jake and I had thrown ourselves into the work, fixing fences, repairing the barn, and now digging a new well. The old one had run dry years ago, and we needed water if we were going to make a go of this place. Jake shone the flashlight where my shovel had struck. The beam reflected off something smooth and metallic, a stark contrast to the dark earth surrounding it. "What is that, Dad?" Jake asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I shrugged, already scraping away more dirt with my hands. "I don't know, Bud. Let's find out." As we dug, the object began to take shape. It was a metal container, about the size of a small suitcase. It looked old, the once shiny surface now pitted and corroded. My mind raced with possibilities. A time capsule, buried treasure, or just some farmer's junk, tossed in a hole and forgotten. It took another hour of careful digging to free the container from the earth. By the time we hauled it out of the well, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the field. We carried our find back to the barn, both of us silent, lost in our own thoughts about what might be inside. Under the harsh glare of the barn's floodlights, I examined the container more closely. It was sealed tight, with no obvious way to open it. A faded inscription was barely visible on one side, but years of corrosion had made it illegible. "Should we open it?" Jake asked, practically bouncing with excitement. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to call the police, or maybe a lawyer. What if this was evidence of something? But curiosity won out. "All right," I said, reaching for a crowbar. "Stand back." It took some effort, but finally, the lid creaked open. The smell hit us first, musty and damp, like an old cellar. Inside, protected by layers of waxy paper, was a stack of documents and photographs. I picked up the first photo, holding it under the light. It showed a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, smiling at the camera. The picture was old, probably from the 1960s, judging by her hairstyle and clothes. I turned it over. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "Sarah Milligan, 1964. Jake peered over my shoulder. Who's that, Dad?" I shook my head. "I don't know." But as I said it, a nagging feeling started in the pit of my stomach. The name Milligan sounded familiar, but I couldn't place why. We spent the next hour going through the contents of the box. There were more photos, all of the same young woman, Sarah, at various locations around what looked like this very farm. There were also letters, newspaper clippings, and a small, leather-bound journal. As I flipped through the journal, a yellowed newspaper clipping fell out. The headline made my blood run cold. "Local woman still missing after 3 months." I read the article quickly, my heart pounding. Sarah Milligan had disappeared from her family's farm in the summer of 1964. Despite an extensive search, no trace of her was ever found. The article mentioned that Sarah's father, the owner of the farm, was the primary suspect, but was never charged due to lack of evidence. "Dad?" Jake's voice snapped me back to the present. "What's wrong?" I looked at my son, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake, I think we just found evidence in a very old missing persons case." His eyes widened. "Really, like a real mystery?" I nodded, my mind racing. "Yeah, bud, a real mystery." I started gathering up the documents, careful not to disturb them more than necessary. "We need to call the police." The next few hours were a blur. Deputies came out to the farm, followed by detectives and a crime scene unit. Our quiet little farmhouse became the center of a whirlwind of activity. Jake and I were questioned separately, telling and retelling how we'd found the box. It was past midnight when things finally calmed down. The box and its contents had been taken away as evidence, and we'd been told not to discuss the case with anyone, as if we knew anyone to discuss it with. We were still new in town, barely knew our neighbors. I tucked Jake into bed, his head full of excitement about our discovery, but sleep eluded me. I sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of me, staring out at the darkened fields. What had happened to Sarah Milligan? And why did her name sound so familiar? The next morning, I drove into town, determined to do some digging of my own. The local library was small, but it had archives of the town's newspaper going back decades. I spent hours poring over microfiche, reading everything I could about the Milligan case. Sarah had been 23 when she disappeared, engaged to be married. Her fiancé had reported her missing when she didn't show up for a date. The last person to see her was her father, James Milligan, who claimed she'd left the farm to run errands in town. As I read, pieces started falling into place. James Milligan, that was my uncle's name, the uncle who'd left me this farm. With a growing sense of dread, I realized why Sarah's name had sounded familiar. My mother had mentioned her once, years ago, a cousin who'd gone missing before I was born. I left the library in a daze, my mind reeling. Had my uncle been involved in Sarah's disappearance? Had I inherited not just a farm, but a dark family secret? When I got home, there was a police car in the driveway. Detective Reeves, the lead investigator, was waiting for me. "Mr. Collins," she said as I got out of my truck. "We need to talk." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd spent a sleepless night. Detective Reeves didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We've identified the DNA on some of the items in the box," she said, her eyes boring into mine. "It matches Sarah Milligan. We're treating this as a homicide investigation now." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Mr. Collins, I have to ask, did you know anything about this before you found that box?" I shook my head vehemently. "No, absolutely not. I inherited this farm from my uncle 6 months ago. I never even met him." She raised an eyebrow. "Your uncle?" I took a deep breath. "James Milligan, Sarah's father." Detective Reeves leaned back, surprised. "You're related to the Milligans?" I explained what I'd learned at the library, about the connection I'd only just discovered. As I talked, I could see the wheels turning in the detective's mind. "Mr. Collins, I'm going to be straight with you," she said when I finished. "This complicates things. We're going to need to do a thorough search of the property, and I'm afraid you and your son might need to find somewhere else to stay for a while." I nodded, feeling numb. "Of course, whatever you need." The next few weeks were a nightmare. The farm became a crime scene, with police and forensic teams combing every inch of the property. Jake and I moved into a motel in town, watching from afar as our new home was torn apart in search of evidence. The story hit the local news, then went national. Suddenly, our quiet little town was overrun with reporters and true crime enthusiasts. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious box, about Sarah Milligan, about the farmer who'd inherited a decades-old secret. I tried to shield Jake from the worst of it, but it was impossible to hide everything. He was old enough to understand the basics of what was happening, and his initial excitement about solving a mystery had given way to a more somber understanding of the reality we were facing. It was Jake who asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Dad, do you think Uncle James did it? Do you think he killed Sarah?" I pulled him close, wishing I had a better answer. "I don't know, buddy. I really don't know." As the investigation dragged on, more details emerged. Old case files were reopened, witnesses re-interviewed. The picture that emerged was a sad one. Sarah had wanted to leave the farm, to start a life with her fiancé. James Milligan had opposed the marriage, wanting Sarah to stay and help run the family business. But there was no smoking gun, no confession, just a lot of circumstantial evidence and a family torn apart by secrets and suspicion. Finally, after nearly 2 months, we were allowed to return to the farm. The police had found no other evidence, and while the investigation remained open, they had no reason to keep us from our home. The farm felt different now. Every creaking floorboard, every rustle in the fields seemed to whisper of long-buried secrets. I found myself avoiding the spot where we'd found the box, as if Sarah's ghost might be lingering there. As we settled back into our routines, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were living in the shadow of a tragedy. The farm that was supposed to be our fresh start now felt tainted, haunted by the echoes of the past. But we stayed, partly because we had nowhere else to go, but also because it felt like we owed it to Sarah, to uncover the truth, to bring her story to light after so many years of silence. I don't know if we'll ever know exactly what happened to Sarah Milligan, but I do know that her story, and the secrets of this farm, are now a part of our lives, and somehow, we'll find a way to live with that, to honor her memory while building our own future on this land. Every time I pick up a shovel now, I can't help but wonder, what other secrets might be buried beneath our feet? And are some things better left undiscovered? The first time I saw the blue sedan, I thought nothing of it. By the third time, my palms were sweating on the steering wheel. By the fifth, I was fighting the urge to scream. What had started as a carefree road trip with my girlfriend had turned into a nightmare, with every mile bringing us closer to a confrontation I knew we couldn't avoid. As I checked the rearview mirror for the 100th time, seeing those now familiar headlights, I realized with chilling certainty that our past had caught up with us, and it was driving a blue sedan. My name's Alex, and until 3 days ago I thought I knew what fear was. I'd been scared before. Who hasn't? But true terror, the kind that seeps into your bones and turns your world upside down, that was new. And it all started with a car that just wouldn't go away. Mia and I had been planning this cross-country road trip for months. Both of us were burned out from our jobs in New York, and we needed a break. The plan was simple: drive from New York to California, taking our time, seeing the sights, and reconnecting with each other away from the stress of the city. The first 2 days were perfect. We sang along to cheesy pop songs, ate too much junk food at roadside diners, and marveled at how big and beautiful the country really was. We were somewhere in the middle of Ohio when I first noticed the blue sedan. It was just a glimpse in my rearview mirror. A nondescript car, maybe a Toyota or Honda, a few cars behind us on the highway. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Why would I? It was just another car on a busy highway. But then we stopped for gas about an hour later, and I saw it pull into a pump across from us. Again, I didn't really register it. Lots of people need gas, right? It wasn't until we stopped for lunch at a diner in the middle of nowhere, Indiana, that the first inkling of unease crept in. As we were leaving, I saw that same blue car pull into the parking lot. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see the driver, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I mentioned it to Mia as we got back on the road. "Hey, does that blue car look familiar to you?" She glanced back, then shrugged. "Maybe. It's a pretty common car, though. Probably just a coincidence." I tried to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started paying more attention, watching for the car in my mirrors, and sure enough, it was always there, a few cars back, never getting too close but never falling too far behind. By the time we crossed into Illinois, I was certain we were being followed. The blue sedan was always there, at every rest stop, every gas station, every time we pulled over to stretch our legs or take in a view. Mia could see how tense I was getting. "Alex, you're being paranoid," she said, but I could hear the note of uncertainty in her voice. Why would anyone be following us? I didn't have an answer for her. We were just a normal couple on a road trip. Who would want to follow us? But I couldn't deny what I was seeing. As we approached Chicago, I made a decision. "We're going to lose them," I told Mia, taking a sudden exit off the highway. "Alex, what are you doing?" Mia asked, gripping the dashboard as I made a sharp turn onto a side road. "Trust me," I said, my eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror. "If they're really following us, we'll know for sure now." I drove us through a maze of suburban streets, making random turns, doubling back on ourselves. For a while, I thought we'd lost them. But then, as we merged back onto a main road, I saw it, the blue sedan, still behind us. "Oh my God," Mia whispered. "You were right." Fear gave way to determination. I pressed down on the accelerator, weaving through traffic, taking random exits and back roads. But no matter what I did, the blue sedan stayed with us, always just within sight. As night fell, we found ourselves on a lonely 2-lane highway somewhere in western Illinois. We hadn't seen another car for miles, just us and the blue sedan, its headlights burning in our rearview mirror. "And we need to confront them," I said, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "This has gone on long enough." Mia looked at me, her face pale in the dashboard lights. "Are you sure that's safe?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I knew we couldn't keep running. We don't have a choice. We're almost out of gas, and we can't keep driving forever. I saw a turnoff ahead, a dirt road leading into a field. Without signaling, I made a sharp turn, kicking up dust as we bumped down the uneven track. The blue sedan followed. About a quarter mile in, I stopped the car and cut the engine. The blue sedan pulled up behind us, its headlights illuminating our car in stark relief. "Stay in the car," I told Mia, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice. "Lock the doors. If anything happens, drive away as fast as you can." Before she could protest, I was out of the car, squinting into the glare of the headlights. "Who are you?" I shouted, Why are you following us? For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the driver's door of the blue sedan opened. A figure stepped out, backlit by the headlights so I couldn't make out any features. Alex? A familiar voice called out, and I felt my world tilt sideways. Is that really you? As the figure stepped forward, I felt my legs go weak. It was a face I hadn't seen in 5 years, a face I never expected to see again. "Dad?" I whispered. The man who had abandoned my mother and me when I was 17 stood before me, older and grayer, but unmistakably my father. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. "Why have you been following us?" He took another step forward, his hands raised as if to show he meant no harm. "I saw you, in Ohio." I couldn't believe it at first. "I've been trying to work up the courage to talk to you." I heard Mia's door open behind me. "Alex, what's going on?" My father's eyes flickered to her, then back to me. "Is this your girlfriend?" I nodded, still too shocked to form words. "I'm sorry," he said, and I could hear the tears in his voice. "I'm so sorry for everything. When I saw you, I couldn't let you go again without trying to make things right." 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Where had he been all these years? Why now? How did he expect to make up for 5 years of absence with a creepy highway stalking routine? But what came out was, "You scared the hell out of us." He laughed, a sad, broken sound. "I know I didn't mean to. I didn't know how to approach you. Every time I worked up the courage, I'd lose it at the last second." Mia came to stand beside me, her hand slipping into mine. "Maybe we should all talk," she said softly. "There's a diner about 10 miles back. We could get some coffee, sort this out." I looked at her, then back at my father. Part of me wanted to get back in the car and drive away, to leave him standing there in the dust like he'd left us all those years ago. But another part, a part I'd thought long dead, wanted answers. "Okay," I said finally. "But we're taking separate cars, and if you try anything funny, we're gone. Understand?" He nodded, relief washing over his face. "Of course, whatever you want, Alex." As we drove to the diner, following the blue sedan this time, Mia squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. I never thought I'd see him again. I don't know what to feel." She leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. That's what this trip was about, right? Facing things together." I managed a small smile. She was right, of course. When we'd started this road trip, we'd talked about leaving our baggage behind, about making a fresh start. I never imagined that baggage would come find us on the highway. As we pulled into the diner parking lot, I took a deep breath. I didn't know what would happen next, what explanations or excuses my father might offer. I didn't know if I could forgive him, or if I even wanted to try. But I did know one thing. This road trip had taken an unexpected turn, leading us not just across the country, but into the tangled web of my past. And whatever came next, Mia was right. We'd face it together. I stepped out of the car, ready to confront the man who had followed us across 3 states, the man who had once been my father. Ready to hear his story, and maybe, just maybe, to start writing a new chapter in our own. As we walked into the diner, the smell of coffee and the hum of late-night conversations washing over us, I realized that sometimes, the most important journeys aren't about the destinations we plan, but the unexpected detours that force us to face the things we've been running from all along.